This is part 1 of the Bible Survey course, section 1. This is an introduction to the course and an introduction to Genesis and to Job. First, let's begin on how the course is structured. This is going to be a chronological progression of biblical material. The readings and the lectures will reflect a movement through history, starting at the beginning of what the biblical text gives us, moving through the most recent events that it records. This is not a classic book-by-book study. We won't be going through every single book in the order that it's listed in the canon. Sometimes certain books will be integrated into each other because some of the historical material overlaps with each other. And some may wonder why we should study the Bible in this way. There's a few reasons. First, it keeps the Bible in a historical redemptive context. And so what that means is how has God unfolded the picture of redemption throughout actual history, throughout the progression of time and space, which is exactly how we want to view it. It's an unfolding narrative. That's what's going on with the Scripture. It happens in real time. It happens in real space. And it's sometimes best to get an all-sweeping view of what's going on by doing it that way. This allows for a larger context of events and the writings themselves. So since we're going to be starting in the Old Testament chronologically, we need to look at some Old Testament issues. First, let's talk about relevance. A question can be asked, is something this old still relevant for us today? A lot of people have doubts about that. A lot of people question, can something from roughly 3,000 or more years ago still be applicable to people in the modern cultural context? To give away and to show the hand a little bit as we move forward, I would say yes, that there are still a lot of very relevant things that apply very deeply to us in a spiritual and meaningful way from the Old Testament. The question that kind of follows off of this is, can the cultural gaps be bridged? Is there a way to really make connections with the very distinct type of culture that was going on at the time of the writing of the Old Testament throughout the different eras and epochs? And the reality is that there's great ways to be bridged, great historical work that has been done. Fantastic ways for us to understand what's actually going on in the Old Testament time and to be able to make applications today. Another question has to do with the reliability. Is the text itself trustworthy? And as we go along in each section, we will deal with some textual issues. We will talk about the reliability of the text. We will talk about some of the translation issues. A lot of people have questions about that. Is this really the best way to deal with the translation? Which kind of text should be used? What about the Greek Old Testament over against the couple of different kinds of Hebrew texts that are available to us? And so we'll be dealing with those kinds of issues. Surprisingly, the Old Testament text is incredibly reliable as far as textual variation goes, given its age and how long ago it was written. And then each time that we move through different sections, in most of these sections, there will be what's called a special issues section. What will be going on with these is that we'll be asking questions, not necessarily providing answers. We'll be talking about the next time special issues around the way people understand the creation narratives. We'll be talking about special issues surrounding the flood when we come to that story. We'll be talking about special issues talking about the dating of the Exodus and the time that the Hebrews spent in slavery in Egypt. And some of those kinds of things have a long history of debate and dialogue among theologians, not just recently, but also in ancient church history. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be providing additional recommendations for reading for these. People may want to take time to pursue a particular area that has some nuances to it. All of that won't be able to be covered in this because this is a survey, but it'll be important to point out these issues and give people an opportunity to study them further. So what is next? Next for the reading. If you follow the reading precisely, and we're following the chapter a day model, and there's a link to that in the introductory material prior to this video, you will usually be ahead of the lectures. And so, for example, you will have read most of Job before we get to the Job lecture. Your assignment for this week, even though we're not covering any of the creation narrative, is to have read the first 7 chapters of Genesis. And so by the time you get to this lecture and have read the material for this point, next time we will deal with some of the creation narrative, you have already read all of those chapters. And so it won't always be like that. Sometimes you'll be a little behind, sometimes you'll be a little ahead. But the course is designed to stay pretty close to whatever you're getting in the lectures, you having either already read it or you're about to read it. And that's just the best way. Now, the lectures for the next 13 weeks are as follows. We're going to spend 3 weeks on the beginnings. There's a lot of issues there, a lot of things that need to be dealt with, a lot of survey kind of material to walk through various viewpoints that people have, the pros and cons of those, the way that people understand certain things in the text, the theological significance of God having made the world and the fall and the flood and all of these kinds of things. And then we'll move to Job. Job actually chronologically falls somewhere between the beginning narratives of Genesis 1 through 11 and then the call of Abraham in Genesis 12 through the end of the book. And so if we're going to talk historical, chronological, which is what we're walking through, Job will be inserted there. And then we'll look at the life of Abraham. We'll spend 3 different sections on that. And then we will look at his son Isaac. Then we'll look at his son Jacob. And then we will look at the life of Joseph in 2 parts, the Christological realities of Joseph and the historical ones as well. And then we'll look at the prophecy of Israel's son, actually Israel's sons, and then we'll look at the death of Jacob and of Joseph, and that will close out the first 13 weeks after this week. So that will give you 14 weeks of reading and then 14 distinct lectures that go along with that. In order for you to be successful, some keys to success on this. The first one and the most important one is to stay on top of the reading. As I mentioned earlier, this course is designed to follow a chapter-a-day plan. That plan has a link to it where you can print that off, and it gives you the listing in the general chronological sense in which the reading will follow. At the start of each one of these course lecture series, just like this one, you will have what the assignment is, which sections you're supposed to read for that particular lecture. And then, of course, most of the lecture sections will have a few free days built into the reading schedule. So, for example, this first 14-week rotation actually has about 6 days built into it that you wouldn't have to do any reading to cover the time. And so there's a little bit of wiggle room there if you miss a day or whatever. Don't become too stressed out about that. Don't become too legalistic about it. This is a long-term commitment. And we'll look a little bit more about that in a moment. But if you follow it properly, it will take you roughly 3.5 years to go through all of this material. There's 1,189 chapters in the English Old and New Testaments combined. When you break that out over the course of a 3-year period, it comes down to about 3.2 years or 3.25 years by the time you add in the breaks and the pauses that we give for working through these lectures and that sort of thing. Essentially, what you will have is about a 3.5-year reading plan to have gone through the whole Bible and then to receive some of the survey material. There are going to be optional readings for the special issues. These are optional. You do not have to do them. Do not burden yourself down with trying to read through the text and listen to the lectures and read 2 or 3 or 4 books related to special issues and try to keep up all the way along. That's not going to be functional. Along the way, and this actually leads to the next issue for success. Remember, this is a survey. It will not cover everything. In fact, a lot of times it won't even give specific understandings of this is the best way to understand this or the best way to understand that. Sometimes it's just going to present material. That's all that's going to happen. It's going to say, okay, here are 6 or 7 views on the creation narratives. These are the pros, these are the cons, and it's just going to move on. Because that's what a survey does. The survey covers the basic material, it presents varying viewpoints, and it gives you an opportunity to evaluate the worth and the value of certain perspectives. Now, as you go along, you'll be able to kind of pinpoint which perspective I'll be coming from because of how I'll address some of the other material along the way. But a survey is not going to cover everything. It won't do everything exactly the way that you want it to, in the manner that you want it to. But that's all right. That's completely okay. There's absolutely no issues with that whatsoever. But if you try to pile in a lot of extra reading from some of the special issues on top of what you're doing in the survey, it'll trip you up, it'll slow you down. And so you might want to mark down, hey, I want to read this, or I really want to specialize on this for a little while I'm doing some of the other kinds of things. I need to go back and take a look at that. Remember, take advantage of the recommended readings to follow up with issues that are important to you. Learning is for life. This isn't something you're all going to cram in just at one moment and one time. This is the sort of thing that would take a lifetime to pursue, and that's all right. You'll always be able to pursue special issues as you go along, or you can come back to them later. You can come back and redo some of the lectures later. You can delay going into a lecture until you have time to read. You can stretch this out more than the 3.5 years. If you're really aggressive, you can squeeze it in sooner than the 3.5 years. But by the time it's all said and done, this is going to open up a lot of avenues for further study and for further pursuit of information and knowledge. And so I hope that you have a good time with this. This is going to be a great quest for us to take together, a good journey for us to go on. And as we walk through this, at the end of a 3.5 year time period, you would have read through the entire Scripture, both Old and New Testaments. You would have gotten some general background information, some historical context. You would have been able to evaluate some special issues. You would have heard a presentation, hopefully in a fair and balanced way, of some of the different interpretive views, and you would have gotten a very large, overarching, sweeping view of what the whole Bible is actually about. And that's the goal of this entire series. So I hope you have a good time with it. I hope that you enjoy it, and I look forward to walking through this journey with you.